Hey guys, welcome back. In this lesson, we'll be taking a tour of ASP.NET Core's identity features. When I say identity features, identity is the feature set or the library that ASP.NET Core uses to manage authentication and users. So far in our application, we have done quite a bit of work. We've set up the layout to some extent. We've put in some crowd features for leaf types, where we can add leaf types, remove leaf types, edit them, and review them. Now, I'm sure you're probably on the receiving end of these lessons and thinking, well, I'm sure that in a leave management system, it wouldn't be this open for anybody to be able to go in and manage the leave types. Something like leave types should be reserved for maybe an admin user and maybe not a regular user. In the same way, we intend to put in features to apply for leave and by extension, manage leave applications, meaning approve or reject them, also manage employees. And these features would kind of suggest that the users need to be in different categories, right? Somebody needs to be able to, one, log in, which means that an account has to exist somewhere for them to put in a username and a password and actually authenticate against what we know. So what we would know is what is in the database, the information for any given user in the database. Somebody comes in and puts in the information, and then we verify that the information they have put in is correct. And then we grant them access to whether the application altogether or to certain aspects of the application. So in this video, we're going to go through what it takes to actually set up the login functionality, allowing people to register in our application and actually allowing them access to the application or rejecting it. Now, when we created this application, we had indicated that we wanted to create it with individual user accounts support. And so because we selected those options in our main menu in our nav bar, before we started putting in other links, we noticed that we had a login link and a register link. All right, so they gave us the underlying framework for this to happen. And so the feature is there. One thing we had to do was run an initial migration, which is where we actually rolled out the tables that were required for this functionality to be supported. So, you know, before now, maybe we would have had to, and when I say before now, in previous versions of .NET framework and, well, .NET programming and in most other applications, you actually have to sit down and build out your user tables and, you know, outfit all of those things. What happened is that they actually gave us the framework, so we just had to run a few commands and they were actually created for us and we can leverage it. And then they have a number of features for security reasons and that we can leverage, build on top of, and improve as we may see fit. But then the fact is that it is a pretty robust login system that they're giving us out of the box, and we want to just have a better understanding of it before we start modifying it. Now, back in Visual Studio, I went to my SQL Server Object Explorer, and remember that if you don't see that pane anywhere, you can always click View, and then you would be able to just select it from View, and then you can drag it to whichever section of Visual Studio's window you feel more comfortable with it being. I like it to the far left, so I'm just going to dock it on this side. And I went into SQL Server, then into my local DB/MSSQL instance and databases, leave management, as that's the name of our database. And then I'm just showing you that there are a number of tables here with the name ASP.NET, or rather they're prepended. The names of the tables are prepended with ASP.NET. All right, so all of those would have been included in that initial migration exercise where we scaffolded the database tables to begin with. Now, all of these tables play some form of role in managing our users. So I'm sure you can deduce that ASP.NET users is where the users are being stored. And if we expand this and just look at the columns, you see that we have an ID, which uniquely identifies any user, a username, an email address, and we have password, hash, and phone number. And then when we were building out our models, we actually created an employee model, which inherited from the underlying ASP.NET user class, and we extended it by adding some more fields that we deem necessary for our system. But the fact is, out of the box, we got from discriminator to ID, or from ID to discriminator. All of those came standard with our identity libraries. We also have ASP.NET roles. So the roles table pretty much just stores a name, and well, a normalized name, an ID, and some other data. So what's really important is the name. And I'm saying that that's the most important between name and normalized name, because that's the name of the role. Is it an administrator role? Is it an employee role? Is it a supervisor role? You know, different applications have different levels of users, and that's what we call roles. So the roles themselves are stored in this table, because then you don't want to create a user and then assign a role, and maybe you spell administrator incorrectly on this occasion, and then you end up with the same role with different variations. So we just store the roles one time, and then we have another important table called ASP.NET user roles. So this is, if you know database, well, this is a many-to-many relationship, because you have many users, and many users can embody many roles, because you can have an administrator who is also an employee. So they would have to have more than one roles. So to avoid any duplications in either of these tables, they created another table that meets them kind of halfway, which is the ASP.NET user roles table, where it stores the user ID and the role ID. In other words, if I'm user 1 and I am an employee and employee's role ID 2, then the record in ASP.NET user roles is going to look like user ID 1 with role ID 2. If you are maybe a supervisor and an administrator, then you're going to have 2 entries in the user ID, and let's say your ID was 5, so you're going to have 5 to 1, which is administrator, and 5 to 3, which is supervisor, whatever it is. The point is, this is where we create the association between a user and his or her role. And for this video, those are the 3 most important tables, and the 3 tables I'm going to focus on while we understand exactly how user authentications work. Now, going back to our application, our first experiment is to create a user. So when we talk about creating a user, it's really registration. You go to facebook.com for the very first time. You want to register. You're literally creating a user record inside of Facebook's registry. So literally, when you go to Facebook and you fill out that form and click sign up, all they did was take that information from the screen, put it in a database, just like the one I just showed you, put it in a users table, and then they allow you to log in. And each time you put in your username that you specified and that password, all they do is take that information and check if there's a record in the users table that actually has a username that looks that way and a password that looks that way. And they tell you, yes, it's correct. Here's your information. It's incorrect. Please try again. That's literally all that's happening. And so ASP.NET makes it just that easy. So I can literally go to register, and I can provide an email address, and I'm going to use a legitimate email address. So I'm going to put in one of my less used email addresses, and I'm going to put in a password. So the password I'm putting in is the word password. And then I'm going to click register. So when I click register, okay, so it's specifying that my password needs to meet certain standards, and that's fine. We can meet these standards. So out of the box, we see that they're kind of telling us the password strength that is required. So the password strength, they're saying that I must have at least one non-numeric, one non-alphanumeric. So in other words, I must have a capital letter, so capital P. I must have some character that's not a number or a word or a letter. So I'm going to put the @ for A, password, SSWORD. And they say that I need to have a number, so I'm going to put 1. So that's capital P @ SSWORD 1. And I'm going to try again. All right, so then it moves on to a page called register confirmation, and then they give us a little message saying we don't have a real email sender registered, so you can read docs to see how to configure it, which we'll be doing later. But normally this would be email, but they're giving us a fail-safe link. So in standard English, in case this didn't mean much to you, when you're signing up for most websites these days, they kind of say, please check your email to confirm your identity. And when you go to your email, you usually see an email from them where they just say, click this link, and then you're officially registered. So that's all they're saying, that we need to configure something that will actually trigger an email that does something like this. But in the meanwhile, here is the link that you would have gotten in the email anyway. So once again, we can do that at a later date, but let's just continue with confirming our registration. So we click here to confirm, and then they say, okay, confirm email. So I went back to my home page, and now I can try and log in. So when I click login, I'm going to put in the email that I just used and the password, which is capital P @ SSWORD1, in case you're using the same password as me. And then I'll just click login. And then you'll see that we're logged in. And notice that now the text in the area that said login and register now changes to hello, something which is my email address, and they have a logout button. So if I click logout, obviously that will terminate the session, but just by being here, they know that I'm now logged in. Now I'm going to go back into Visual Studio, go back into our database, and I'm going to show you the changes that happened when we did that registration process. So in ASP.NET users, I'm just going to right click that table, and then I'm going to say view data. And then this loads a data pane showing all the data in the database, and specifically all the users in the database, since ASP.NET users is storing the users' information. And if you pay close attention, you notice that the first row actually has in information for that user I just created. The username is Lone Crusader 1989 at Gmail, or the same email that I typed. Normalized usually means that they bring it to one standard. So if you may have written it in mixed case, they're going to make everything uppercase, just as a fail-safe in case, different people type certain bits of information differently. So they're normalizing it to one standard to reduce errors. The email address is the same, they normalize it. So you can look through all of these. You see email confirmed is true. So when we did not click the link, this would have been false. And as long as this is false, that user wouldn't be able to log in. But then because we clicked the link, or under normal circumstances, the email would have been sent to the registering party, and then they would click that email. It would then change this flag to true. So all of that is built in. It's out of the box. And literally, this is all that these big companies with registration systems that seem so advanced and robust, asking you to confirm in email, that's all they do. They have a flag, and until you click that link, that flag is not changed. So when you try to log in, they say, boy, you need to change that flag. All right. So we have email confirmed is true. We have what you call a password hash, and I'm just going to expand this column, and we're going to spend some time looking at the values in there. So remember that my password was capital P @ SSWORD1. That's it in English, or whichever language we're in, but it was an combination of letters, a number, and some character. Now look at what is stored in our database. One, you should never be storing passwords in plain text. That is dangerous, because then if somebody got access to the database and saw your password just the way they say the word true, they could just see your password, then that's a clear security risk. They now have enough information to go ahead and access your account. So whenever you're storing passwords, and this is universal to any system or any development stack you're using, always create what we call a hash. Now, out of the box, the identity framework or set of libraries, this feature actually hashed the password. So you don't have to do much more work after asking the person for the password. Maybe you enforce a standard, but then the storage of it is being taken care of by the feature. All right. So this hash, you can never tell what my password was originally by looking at that block of text. Moving along, there are other columns that are, well, for this video, for the purposes of this video, less important, but we have security stamp, concurrency stamp. We have a phone number field, and well, it wasn't confirmed. So we see phone number and phone number confirmed false. So then that's saying that you could build in a feature where you send an SMS to the number, something sort of like what certain messaging platforms do. then you can move on and you see that all of these other fields are null. They're really null because, well, the user record was created based on the information that was given on the form. The form did not request date of birth, date joined, first name, last name, tax ID. None of that was required at the time of registration. So, of course, in modifying our application, we can either require the information by modifying the form, making sure it gets submitted to the database, or we can, set up some interface that we can actually request that information at a later date. But at the end of the day, we want to keep our registration simple. For this system, of course, we'll look into how we could modify it later on. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to keep it simple. All we need is a username and a password, or an email address and a password. And you see here that we're using the email address as the username also. This is also something that we probably would want to modify, because a username doesn't always scream password. A username doesn't always scream email. So we want to modify this, that we allow them to enter a username, enter an email, and a password, and then they're into the system. Now, if we click hello, if you hover over the block of text that tells you hello, you notice that the hand appears, which suggests that it's clickable, right? And when we do that, we see that we get a manage kind of dashboard, and you probably will see a message saying thank you for confirming your email. That's fine, but you'll see all of this, and from here you'd be able to view the profile of the user, or the user who is logged in rather can view their profile. They can view their email and probably make an update. They can change their password by putting in the current one and putting in a new one. It supports two-factor authentication. Of course, we would have to configure this properly, and then they allow you to view, make a backup of your personal data, and also delete your account. Now, I'm showing you all of this because, once again, all of these things are out of the box. All you have to do is have an appreciation for how they work and then modify. But the initial build, that work, is not there, because Microsoft is saying, let's get these little things that everybody wants out of the way and focus on the things that really matter. So they give you this out of the box, and then they say, okay, well, if you need to modify it, then go right ahead. Now, we've been looking at views and models and controllers all this time, and I have shown you that in the code, if you wanted to see, and I'm just going back to Visual Studio, going back to the solution, that if we wanted to see the controllers, that we could always go and see the controller, and the controller calls the action. So we know when it calls the index action, it's going to look for the view index, and then we're going to see the index. We should be comfortable enough with the concept of that by now. But if you take a deeper look, you'd notice that there are no controllers that mention users. There's nothing here that has anything to do with users yet. If we look at the link, it suggests that there is a section called identity and account and manage. And if we know anything about the link, and I'll just go to leaf types, since that's the one we built. When we say /leaf types, it's going to look for the controller called leaf types. If we click on any link, like if we click on edit, then we know that it's looking for the controller called leaf types, and it's looking for the action called edit, and then it's passing the parameter too. So the fact is that based on the link, we can kind of deduce where exactly in the code these actions are being taken. So I can easily find that, oh, it's calling the edit action, which is getting the 2, and then it's returning the view that we know we can find inside of the views folder, and we can just easily look at it. Now, once again, the point is that the identity structure is not there. We can't find the views, and I can spend some time looking through it, or you can pause the video and just look through and tell me if you find them. But they're not as readily identifiable, and that's because they did not create a structure like that model view controller structure that we are creating. They didn't do that for the identity features. Now, you may be onto something if you paused and you started looking for yourself, and then if you went into areas and expanded areas, you would see that there's a folder here called identity, and then inside identity you have pages, but then you only have one page, which is a view start, which is only saying which layout it should use. You can have multiple layouts, but that's something for another day. But the fact is, that's all we see suggesting that there is some identity feature somewhere. So as a final act for this video, we're going to build out all the pages, or rather have Visual Studio provide us with access to all the pages that are being used inside of the identity management. All right, so you can just do these few steps and then you have all the pages, and then we can start our modifications to our forms and how our logic operates. So firstly, I'm going to right click on areas, and then I'm going to click add, and it doesn't have to be areas, but just right click and then say new scaffold item. See, that's what we've done. Controller, we've done class. This time we're doing new scaffold item. So we click new scaffold item, and then this is then going to ask us what do we want to lay out, and then in the side here we'll see identity. So you just click identity and then click add, and then it's going to do some work. Then they give us this dialog box where they're saying, okay, we're about to add the identity. What files do you want? So we can select, one by one which ones we want. And once we select them, then they will be provided to us. But then I'm just going to say I want them all. So I'm just going to click override all files. So the files are implied, so to speak. And I say implied because we don't have visibility on them. So they're implied that they're there. So they're saying, do you want to override the implied files with the physical files? So I'm saying, yes, override all files. Give me physical files that I can see and modify as I wish. And then they're going to say, okay, what is the data context class? We know that we have application DB context as our context class. And then we can just go ahead and click add. We don't need to provide any other information. And then we will do some more work. All right, so that might have taken a while, but once it's done, you'll get this nice page with a README letting you know that the support was added. And if you need to do further things, then they tell you that you can add these lines to your startup.cs file. But if I look in my startup.cs file, then I would see that they're kind of already there. I already have my app routing and authentication, authorization. All of those things were there before. So they're just letting you know that you can do this in case, right? But we already have it, so we can actually just take this off and then proceed. Now, if we look to our left, inside of the pages, inside of entity and areas, then we will see that we have a bunch of new files. And if we expand accounts, we see we have lots of new files. Each of these new files corresponds with a view that we would see when doing some user-related option or some user-related operation. So, for instance, we did registration just now. So if I click on register, then you'll see that it gives you the code for the registration form. They ask you for the email, they ask you for the password, and then they ask you to confirm the password, right? And that is what gave us that registration form. And then another thing to note is that we still don't have a controller. So you're probably wondering, okay, so I see the front end or I see the HTML and I see how the form is, being rendered. What happens after I click submit? So remember that with our MVC models, MVC coding, when we hit submit, it calls back the controller, and what we do after you click submit, we would have specified inside of a controller. There's still no controller anywhere here for anything identity related. And that's because these views are using, so the identity views are using something called Razor Pages. So, and with this, I'm going to close this chapter and then we can delve into it a bit more. But I just want you to have an appreciation of what's happening. So we have our register.cs HTML. We know that that's a view, right? And we look and we see that. But if we look closely, we see that there is a caret to the left, or this little arrow that suggests that there's something else attached to the view. So if I compare that with the views that we have, so I just went back into my views folder and I'm looking at the leaf types views, and you notice that these views are just dead files. There's no caret to the left. There's nothing else. These views only correspond with what's in the controller. All right. But then in this situation, this view, which is the same HTML front end and, Razor front end, it actually has a C# extension file that is underneath it. So when I expand any one of these pages that was generated, you see that there is a C# file underneath it. So if I go into the register.cshtml.c#, then I'm going to start seeing code that would kind of look like what we've been doing between our models, where we built a class. So you see here I have a public class and I call it input model, and I'm doing some properties with some data annotations to specify the validations. And I'm also doing some functions where I see get and post. All right. So once again, I'm not going to delve in too deep. I'm just letting you know that whatever logic is governing the behavior of the registration page outside of the front end is actually being done inside of the .cs file that is attached to the view file. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and modify the register and the login forms.